Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And let me start by declaring my membership of the Institution of Engineering and Technology. I'm a Fellow at the Royal Society of the Encouragement Arts, Manufactures and Commerce, and I'm a professional member of the Association for Computing Machinery. And in relation to some of the history, that last one is perhaps in some ways the most important, because on the 9th of December 1968, at a meeting of the ACM, Douglas Engelbart demonstrated a system which had windows, hypertext, graphics, video conferencing, and it showed the first mouse in action. And there's actually a video of that demonstration you can see on the internet today. Now, the motion that we have before us from the government talks about the need to harness public and private sector. And it's worth just visiting the history of how we got here today. The public sector played a very important part in the digital developments that we benefit from today. Tommy Flowers, who was an engineer at the Dollis Hill lab of the Post Office during the last war, actually, using his own money, developed the first electronic computer. He scrounged a huge number of electronic valves and produced a computer for use at Bletchley Park, against the recommendation of the person who was running the place, and so contributed enormously to the war effort. The commercial company that was Lyons Tea Shops produced the first commercial computer, which ran its first transactions in 1951. So the history that we have encompassed in today's motion is a long-standing one, requiring both the public and private sectors to work together. Now, of course, digital way of expressing data is very long held. It was Leibniz in 1679 who came up with the binary system. It was George Boole who introduced Boolean algebra, which underlies much of it, in 1847. The first digital electronic circuit into Edinburgh was installed in 1868. That was a telegraph circuit that connected the Bank of Scotland's head office in Edinburgh to its office in London. The bank incidentally installed its first telephone in 1881. The board said it could only be done on the strict understanding it not be used to conduct business. He will.
Mr.
When I get to the
Rumbles,
substance of the debate this afternoon.
I was just mulling that over myself. I'm looking for the historic reference in the government's motion.
Well, I hope, colleagues, that line 5 of the government motion, which says wider public sector and private sector is the most effective way of improving digital capabilities, is perhaps relevant to some of the remarks I've made so far. But let us move on to today, Presiding Officer, and the important things we have to do to deliver the modern world in which everyone can benefit from the adoption of digital technologies. Now, we know that about 2% of our workforce is employed in the digital economy. We heard from James Kelly in particular, I think, about the gender discrepancy there is in the industry, and he's right to say that. Although, interestingly, when I started in 1969, it was more or less 50-50. What seems to have happened is when the BBC computer was launched in 1981, parents gave the computer to the sons in the family. And actually, you can see in the graph, a couple of years after that, the gender bias moves dramatically towards men. So sometimes there are cultural issues as well as government policies. But women will be very welcome in this industry, and I hope that they will join the over 60,000 people who are working in computers today. Now, the important thing is getting infrastructure in place. Now, Mike Rumbles wants us to cut the implementation period of the R100 programme from the 549 days it will have for implementation if we follow the government's programme to 334 days if it's to be delivered on the schedule that Mike Rumbles wants. So that's quite a substantial downlift. And of course, you can't simply squeeze projects into smaller spaces without taking risks. The non-commutativity of time and effort applies to the project. You illustrate that by thinking if it takes I'll just finish this wee bit and then I will. If you think of a grave digger digging a grave and it takes them 6 hours, it simply doesn't mean that 6 grave diggers can do it in 1 hour. I'll now, if I may.
Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm somewhat confused. It was quite clear in the government's programme that broadband R100 would be delivered by the next election. That's what they stood on the last election for. And in fact, that's what the First Minister said up until January this year. Then she started to change, and it wasn't until Fergus Ewing changed his position, which happened in about March, that the First Minister then changed her position, which, if I remember rightly, was in about July. So I think the people in Scotland are only expecting R100 to be rolled out by May 2021, which is what we were originally promised. I don't understand what the observation is. Perhaps the member could explain it to me.
Mr Stevenson, I'll give you your time back.
I think the members should consider that it's better to set a realistic timescale in the light... do forgive me, colleagues. I'm not rebutting a single word a colleague is saying about previous intentions. I'm making the very substantial point that when you're rolling out to the last 5%, it's a huge programme to undertake, and you need to have the right amount of time to get it right. And any government who fails to deliver on a project that they've then set out, I think will quite properly find themselves in a difficult position. Now, Presiding Officer, you've generously given me a little time back, but let me not over-egg the pudding. We have 120,000 or so homes in Scotland that we have to deliver the R100 programme to. But I think it's correctly been said, the infrastructure of communication is merely the scaffolding upon which you can then build the propositions that actually deliver value. Getting people who are not digitally capable up to a different place in society through libraries and public spaces and the education system, converting private and government business to the digital delivery, that's all part of what we have to do as well. So I certainly look forward personally to getting my super-fast broadband delivered by fibre, and if the last 5% is by fibre, as I guess it will be, we'll actually be ahead of the city